All right. Hello out there. Hello, Dozer Nation. Todd here from Marketing Analytics. Today we have a fun, quirky little tutorial for you. Basically, we're going to be using Blender, which those of you who know is a 3D modeling program. It's free, open source, has a lot of community momentum, and I think it's the future of 3D modeling. So go out today and pick yourself up a copy of Blender for free. But we're going to use that 3D tech to actually create graphics for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Why would we do that? Very good question. I don't know. But we're going to do it, and here's how. So what is Nessmaker? Another good question. Nessmaker is a software that makes actually developing homebrew Nintendo games, NES games that are hardware compatible. You can actually flash them to a cartridge, and it gives you a little development environment. It's basically Unity for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and has a great community. Primarily why I'm doing this video is to, maybe help them out a little bit. They're in the middle of a contest called Bite Off. And here's a little bit of some graphics I've been polishing up. Been working on these for my game. And let's take a look. Just run around here. Gotta compile. Pass 1, pass 2, last try. We got it. So here it is. We got a little bro dude based on my Bullet Bros game, kind of a little start of a demake. And so far I've been kind of just working on some sprite graphics and some trying to figure out the best way to use the palette. But what I'm going to show today is how we can use Blender to kind of visualize some of the sprites quickly. So also let's give credit where credit is due. I was inspired to do this video because of this Blender pixel art tutorial I saw, and it basically kind of shows you how to set up your lighting and get the crunchy pixel look and export it. This one is
because it's so
geared towards character animation a little bit. So make sure to check this out by Southern Shoddy. And I basically expanded on that, just geared it towards the NES development. So let's get going. And before we start, let me adjust the desk real quick. My back is killing me. So just raise this up. And it's always important to keep the back happy, KBH. It's one of Todd's tips. All right, that feels a lot better. So let's get started. Pop open Blender. And what we're going to do is create a grid that's in the same proportion as what we need for Nessmaker. Now, Nessmaker image that we're going to create is a 140 or 128 by 48 pixel image. So here's an example of one of the test ones I baked out for the kind of background ruins. And we can see here, we can either toggle on 8 by 8 chunks or 16 by 16. We're using 16 by 16 in Blender just so we lay it out in a friendly way that lets us paint the screens easily. And you can see up here I can select my chunks, and the smallest we can select is 16 by 16. So that's why we're doing it that way. So to make our grid, let's go to Add Objects, and I'm going to hide my cam real quick so we can see the creation parameters. Don't panic, Todd's still here with you. We're going to go to Add, Mesh, and instead of a plane, we're going to do a grid so we can actually change the subdivision amounts. Oddly enough, we want one more than the size we're looking for. So it's going to be an 8 by 3 grid. You can see here we want 8 across and 3 down. But for whatever reason, when you create the grid, you choose one above whatever amount you need. So 9 by 4. And we can also rotate -90 on the X. Come on, buddy. And it's going to face us forward here. So we have our grid. If we go into X-ray mode with Shift-Z, we can see it's going to be 8 across and 3 vertical. Now let's switch to the side view. So I'm going to click the little green guy here, and I'm also going to go to orthographic mode so it's flat. Now just for the sake of cleanliness, let's turn back our camera on so you don't get worried. I'm going to hit backspace over location so we have this perfectly centered. And we can actually change the dimension right here exactly to what we need. So that's going to be an 8 meter by 3 meter. I use meters, even though I'm an American, I've kind of forsaken our measurement system. So there we go. We have an 8 by 3 grid. Now you might be saying, hey Todd, I see a grid right back here, and you're making another grid. That seems insane to me. Why would you do that? And I would answer, because this way we can have a grid visible in our render camera, and that's important. So when we lay out our geometry, we actually see where it's going. Whoa, where'd that hand come from? My God. All right. Oh, the one last thing. Enable, for us to actually see this in the camera, let's hit Q and go into settings, and we'll choose wireframe. Now, if when you hit Q you don't see the settings option, it might be because you're in the wrong context. It's all context sensitive in the Blender modeling, so I'm in object mode is what you need to be to get those settings. If you're in edit mode and you hit Q, it's going to be a whole different set of options based on the context. All right, so we have our plane and it has wireframe turned on, so we'll be able to see the grid in camera view. Let's see if, yeah, we don't have a camera yet, so it won't show that. Real quick, sorry about this. Gotta go back down, make a little room. All right, let's get to work. Now, what we need to do is make a few little test objects here. So let's go up to add a cube, and I'll go tab and go into edit mode, and let's control alt click to get an edge ring, control B and do a little bit bevel. Basically I'm adding a bevel here so that we have some geometry for the sunlight or whatever our key light is. We have some geometry that can get hit by it, and those are, you know, especially when it gets crunched down to real small pixels, we want enough information there for the light to hit it, give some nice depth. So here's a really cool box. Maybe it'll be like a stack of stones or something. Nice thing about doing this, Control plus will make your selection bigger. Do something like this. Let's go back into our side view and adjust the pivot here. I have if you shift right click, it changes your 3D cursor, and I have a hotkey that changes your pivot to where your cursor is, so that becomes handy to position things. Now you can kind of see what I'm trying to do. I want to make sure that I have a nice organized modular chunks of geometry on this grid. So for example, I might as well take this all the way down. That way, if you need just one single slab, maybe for a ground or something, it's going to fit nicely in that grid in the pixel layout. And I changed the pivot up to the corner, so when I scale, I can just position it kind of where it should anchor and then scale from there. A little pro tip, Todd tip for you. Go out of X-ray mode. Whoa, got a little bit of a... got away from us there. All right. So now, just make a couple copies of this with Shift D. Maybe we rotate them slightly. I'm still a little getting used to Blender. I like it a lot, but I'm only human. I might make some mistakes here and there. Okay, so we have a couple stacked objects, and let's just see what the shading looks like on a sphere. So we'll add a UV sphere. Maybe this will take up 4 of these chunks. So we're just setting, this is just test geometry so we can set up our camera and our shading. Okay, just kind of look at the geometry for a second. Yeah, looks pretty good. Okay, let's make a little cell shader for it. And basically what we're gonna do kind of depends on your approach. Let's take a look at that image again. And what I mean by that is sometimes in backgrounds you can actually use the transparent color, in this case the dark green. You can use that to help add an extra value. In other cases, if that's going to be your sky or something, you might not want to rely on that for shading. The reason I mention that is we have basically, if you count the transparent, that's 4 values you can use to shade your pixels. In this case, I'm using it. But if you do that and then all of a sudden you switch to a different palette where the contrast isn't quite right, it could look funny. But you look at a lot of NES games, most of them actually use black for the background. For this little test, I decided to just reserve black for the characters so that it pops out a little bit from the background. You know, it's up to you. So I think I'll go with that. The reason I mention it is because depending on how many colors you want to shade with, 3 or 4, that kind of dictates how you set up your little cell shader. So let's go into shading here, and here's our guy. We don't have any lights yet, so let's add a sun. Go to light, sun, and I'll give it a little bit of a it also, if you're not seeing the kind of lighting feedback, you want to make sure you're in viewport shading here. And another thing you want to check is make sure over in this little camera icon, make sure you're using Eevee rendering, which is their real-time viewport rendering. So it basically shades similar to how a real-time game engine would shade, which is the main reason I'm switching over to Blender. It's very powerful to see exactly how something would look in a game engine. You know, not really the point of the Nessmaker stuff, but still worth knowing. Okay, so we have our light, and usually for this kind of test, I usually kind of come down at an angle like this. I want to get some highlights going. So that's enough to test the cell shade. Let's go back and hop back in our shading, and we'll select one of these boxers, create a new material, and let's call this Nessmaker test, or we'll call it cell shader. And we delete this. Basically all we want right now is the material output. Now if you hit Shift A, it'll bring up your search, which is the same as going to add here. So Shift A, and we want to search for diffuse, BSDF. Don't ask me what that stands for. It's a secret. And we also want to get a shader to RGB. These are some of the tips from the other reference kind of video I mentioned earlier. Setting this up. And then a color ramp. This is where all the magic happens in the color ramp. It's where all your dreams come true. So we hook these up like this. BSDF to shader, color to FAC, color to surface. Good to go. Now, color ramp, this is where we're going to add, we want one kind of little node for each color we're going to use, so 3 or 4 depending on your setup, the kind of palette you're going to use. And then you kind of drag these around. You can see it's only affecting. It's kind of like playing around with levels in Photoshop. But it's not doing the magic that we need yet until you change linear to constant. Then you get hard drop-offs, and that's what we want for nice, clean, hard pixels. And I also like to change these kind of roughly to the colors I'm using. You could actually, I tried eyedropping right from the image here, but it only eyedrops from within Blender as far as I know. So that's why I'm just gonna eyeball it. So you click your node and then your colors right here. So this will be kind of my dark green, like that. And the next one over will make kind of a dark mustardy brown. Ooh, appetizing. Gotta love those Ness colors. This will be kind of our mid mustard, our Dijon. Okay. Now we're not really seeing so far. All the light's giving us is the bottom two, and then we'll use this for our highlight pixels. Something like that might be close to what we need. So you can see how adjusting the slider here has an effect on the distribution of value. But also, if we select our sun, come back, my sun. Didn't I? Yeah, so I guess do it manually. Let's change a few settings here. We don't want a shadow. I don't want to have to complicate the. I might look into that actually to get a hard, crisp pixel shadow, but right now it's just simpler to keep that off. And let's change these other objects over too as well. We can drop down to our material we just made. Might as well throw it on the background. Well, that's our grid. We'll throw it on there. Ooh, mistake. Now let's leave it for the contrast. So select the sun, and I want to show you if you mess with the strength, we should start seeing those other values in. Ooh, now we're getting the full range there. Pretty cool. Reminds me of some of those double dragon blocks that shoot out at you. So this is perfect technique for double dragon death blocks. I don't know if I ever passed that level. BT dub. Other thing I want to point out is the actual shading of your geometry will have an effect here. So right now this is kind of a faceted smooth shading, but if you go, or faceted doesn't have any smoothing, but if we change it to smooth, then this is what we're going to get. So this pixel look is actually not related to what we're going to be doing, but you might like it, so you can try both of them. Okay, now it's time to create our camera. So I'm going to hop back over to the modeling view here. And for some reason, I guess I have wireframe on everything by default. I think shade wire is maybe what we wanted here, rather than turning everything to wireframe. So on that grid object settings, let's do a shade wire. That way we can really see the grid, but without interfering with the objects in front of it. And it's worth noting that you can have the depth kind of stacked however you want here, as long as it's in front of the camera, essentially. So let's get the camera going. We'll go to Add, Camera, pops up right here. If you do it in the right viewport, it's going to set its orientation correctly. If not, you want a 90-degree X rotation, 180 degrees on the Z. I'm going to zero out the location, the transform here, by hitting backspace. If you hover over any kind of input fields and do backspace, it wipes it out. Nice little handy tip. The other thing I want to do is do a -10 on the Z axis. And what does that give us? Well, oh, sorry about that. -10 on the Y. The Y. Couldn't think of a clever Y-axis name. Oh, it looks like just a 10. My bad. And that's just giving us space so we can move objects in front of the grid. Now that we have a camera, you see if you toggle the little camera here, it'll go to that viewport. So now we're looking at it exactly how it'll render. If we go to render image, we can see what it looks like. Let me turn off something real quick. What we are seeing is kind of the end result. I want to show it without that enabled. Okay, so by default, if we go to render image, you're going to get something like this. It's kind of anti-aliased, and it's not going to be friendly. It's going to be a nightmare if you try to clean that up. You basically have to redraw everything. So with the camera selected, if you're up here in the properties, you want to expand the film drop down, make sure transparent is selected, and then do a really small filter size. I think 0's even worked for me. 0. Now, if we render image, you get the real hard fall off, pretty much straight pixels that we need. There is usually a little cleanup in Nessmaker, which I'll go over, but that's the magic here. But it's not perfect yet. First of all, we have perspective on the camera. We don't need that. So let's change this to orthographic. That's the kind of schematic view, void of any perspective. Now we get a straight-on view, and this will help us match the camera to the grid exactly. And orthographic scale, I already kind of tested that. 8 works to match it up with our grid. Don't ask me why. And the other setting is essential. If we go down here to the output properties, I already have it set as 128 pixels by 48, which is again what Nessmaker prefers for the background tiles. And I believe if you don't have it set to that, it'll actually not compile. So 128 by 48 is essential there. And if you're actually doing for characters, like the other video kind of went over, the character workflows can be extremely valuable. With the same technique, you would want to use 128 by 64. So you'd kind of have to set up a little grid a little differently. I haven't done it with a character, but I'm actually tempted to play around with my guy and try to remake him in a 3D model just so I can play with the squashing stretch of the helmet and stuff. Would be fun in 3D. So we did let's do another test render here. Okay, so now we're getting really close to what the actual output would be, so we can make some judgment calls. Now it's time to have some fun. Let's actually look at some real geometry and move it into frame here. Some of the stuff I was testing out and I actually used in my scene. Here's some test little bricks I made in ZBrush and then crunched them down with a decimate. So I dropped those in. I've done a couple other tests with arches and ruins that I use for the background here. And looking at this, it would be totally acceptable just to go right in and actually create these directly in this pixel editor or Photoshop. So I would say the value is being able to look at something and then iterate on it quickly and try change the lighting really, and then you already have those source files if you want to switch it up. Looks like I created everything in a flipped view in what I was doing. That's why the Y was not negative this time. Okay, so all this geo is back. But what we're gonna bake out this piece here that I've prepared. really need that background plane. It's just going to mess up our placement. So I just want to double check that all these elements are kind of filling the grid in how I'd like them. Yeah, so like a detail like this brick, we might as well move that down to fall right in the grid, just in case we only want to use this 16 by 16 block. Oh yeah, this somehow got out of whack, maybe when I rotated it. Another thing I want to kind of point out, here I'm actually taking advantage of that the depth in front, doing things called like floater geometry, which is a common trick if you're doing like normal maps for games or whatever. Still, it's actually useful. The funny thing is a lot of those techniques are the same. Like if you're used to baking normal maps, I would kind of treat this whole grid as an actual texture you're baking. But my point is, you can just have like, I guess that's concave geometry kind of floating there to create the illusion that it's cut out. It would be a pain in the ass to do an arch kind of cut out from these bricks and extrude it back. Geometry would be a mess. So instead you can have just a floater shell like this in front, which is just like an extruded cube pushed back with the front taken off and with a subdivision. So here we go. Let's take a look at our sun lighting here. Make sure we're getting the most value out of our values there. So this is where the real strength of this workflow is. Like I said, it's when you look at the end result, it's not much different than if you had just done it by hand. But this is where you can really get some good value, some good bang for your buck. And what I'm kind of looking for is a consistent highlight edge. I think this is probably the best that I have so far. And I want to check to make sure I'm using all my values. I should see 4 distinct values, the dark 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so I'm not getting much of that mid-range. You see that? So we can either approach that 2 different ways. We can tweak the sun value, the strength of the sun. Maybe I was going too hot. So if we take that down, and we don't want to get distracted by what the kind of temp colors we actually used. We just want to make sure we're getting some good shading, because those colors are going to change when we tweak our palette. I kind of did prefer the brighter like this. So maybe instead we go into the shading. I guess that's kind of going to be the same results. But I like that. I just didn't want any of those weird triangle cutoffs. But that's kind of a result. Maybe that's cool. Do the little squint test. Yeah, squint the old eyes, take a look at it. Okay. I'm going to move this over slightly. Saw a little sneaky pixel edge. Same thing here, move this down. So even like little details like this, that's just a floater rather than trying to cut in the geometry. Floater, probably not the best terminology. All right, let's save this out. So all we have to do is render image. Take a look, kind of zoom out, give it the old squint test. I'm actually not crazy about how it's rendering, how it's breaking this stuff down. I should have known. So let's maybe that's the sun. Yeah, I'd rather it be a little harder edge right on the arch there. Now it's definitely a balancing act. So I like what it did to the arch there. I don't like this, but I shouldn't worry about it too much. Let's get it close and fix it in Nessmaker. It's real nice, straightforward tools there. So let's render this out. I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe that black will look cool there. All right, so I had one last idea before we clean this up in Nessmaker. And now that we're happy with how this looks with the colors, let's go into Nessmaker, and we are eventually going to want to swap the pixels out for these RGB, just red, green, blue, just to get the channels set up for a palette swapping. So we might as well do that here and make it a little easier on us. Now that we know the angle, the lighting, the distribution of the colors is how we want, we can swap it out with something obvious. So right now the dark green would be too close to black and it would be hard to spot some of the bad pixels, so we're just going to do some very bright, crazy colors here. And we'll do red, green, blue. Well, the background we'll do purple, and the other ones will kind of match close. Like a red. Let's see the order here. I think it's red, green, blue, yeah. And it's just close enough is what we're looking for, because we're going to override these colors with the Nessmaker palette colors. Okay, so I think this will make it a little easier on us. We render image. She's beautiful. Save as. Let's go straight to the 10s. All right, now we hop into Nessmaker. Let's load that bad boy in there. Here it is. All right. So we basically, if we click on show bad pixels, now I'm going to give a quick overview of this, but I recommend watching some of the Nessmaker tutorials on how to use it. But if we click show bad pixels, basically all the pixels are visible because they're all bad. We need to get rid of them, including the transparent shows up as black. So there's this tool here, tile fill, and what we want is global color change. So we click this, and then whatever color we have selected here. So we want black to be black. That was the transparent. And then our dark purple was also something we want to be black. So you see how you click and it basically kind of hones in on the, there's some slight range coming out of Blender. If you figure out how to just get it perfect, let me know what those settings are. Okay, so we got all the black, I think, taken care of. We can also switch over to the regular palette view, and we should see dark green and all the areas that we just overwrote. So that looks good. So red is the next value. So actually probably should have used something different than red. So we'll do the global color change on all these red pixels. No, this actually works good because we're in the bad pixels view. I knew I had a reason for that. Now I'll do the green. Get rid of these green boys. Or girls. And then blue. This is actually a lot better approach than before when I was just swapping out these similar colors. It was hard to tell if I had enough. So there we go. Now we can see, if you've done right, you should be able to switch your palettes down here and see what it looks like. Now these palettes are just previews. It's no actual assignment to our image here. So let's save this out, save BMP file, and I'll save over back char 3, which is one I already had as a test. So here's our new one. Like I said, we might want to. Let's reserve it. Well, I'll show you just now. If we want to clean some up, it's easy to do here. I think ideally you're going to want to touch up and take some of the areas that are strong, leave those, and fix the areas that aren't quite working, But this is promising. I think I might want a little more shadow here. Whoa. You see what I mean? I'm actually using the transparent color as our shadow, so it's a little bit of trickery. And I know our light is coming from that other angle, so maybe we can get away with some drop shadows under some of this. It's definitely just the starting point. But I think that's looking pretty good. Let's save that again. And go into our overworld, our screen painter. I'm going to delete these screens and redo this kind of dungeon area that I started. Double click. Now I like to disable the HUD so we're seeing the full screen. You get a little indicator of your surrounding screens so you can make sure things line up as far as collision and everything. Now this is the kind of default screen tile layout, and this recent version of Nessmaker, they added some cool functionality to change how you want to use your memory for these tiles. And I want to do, instead of normal main screen path, we want to do double main. And we'll leave the first one as is. We're not going to really use this one much. The second one will be B1 main 3, which that's kind of tied to where you save it. So if it doesn't show up here, make sure you just try another one and make sure you saved over the correct place. Use palette here because this screen is one you drop down into. It's kind of might be specific to the Metroidvania module I'm using, but when it drops down, it gives you an opportunity to switch palettes, but I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to stick with what I have here. Close it down. I got to do it again just to reiterate how it's done. And when you start painting, so if you just click one single object up here, it's just going to paint with that. And this is a 16 by 16 chunk like I was talking about. But they have a cool functionality where if you hold shift, it's going to select, it's going to let you kind of stamp down whatever you just selected there. Maybe we add some bricks down here. And I'm seeing some things we should adjust before we get too far. I don't like that line there. And I do think that shadow is a little distracting, so let's pop back into our pixel editor. Luckily it's still up. And just paint that out. Let's make this, that block is trying to steal the show. And where is that other line coming from? Oh, it's right here. Which is kind of interesting, something to think about when you're laying stuff out. The that line is from these blocks kind of stacked like that, so gotta be careful how much detail you cram in there. But I think we fixed some of those issues. Let's save it again. And as far as those changes updating, usually I've found that you kind of have to reselect something and change a palette just here before it refreshes. Okay, so that looks like it works. Now you can, like I said, you can select your palette first and paint, and it'll just automatically paint in that palette. But you can also hold QWER and not clicking, I'm just hovering over those tiles, pressing QWER to switch something over to a different palette. All right, so you get the idea. Now let's make something look kind of pretty. We'll kind of cap this little tunnel there, and let's block in some of the background ruins. Coming from working on my own game in Unity for a number of years, it's pretty fun working with these restrictions. And it's, you know, if you're a fan of the NES in general, it's really cool to problem solve and figure these things out. And a lot of the problem solving is similar to what you do in modern game development, but it's fun to have the hardcore restrictions, and you really feel like you're getting away with something when you pull off a cool effect. And just because something might have been intended as a full piece, like this, or just you can use it just part of it, like this is kind of just the top of this arch. Can look like windows or something, might be more apparent here. So try everything, mess around with it, have fun. Maybe cap some details here. Might be nice to actually have some of these arches with this palette down below. I think that's the strongest element of this. Yeah, that's, in fact, this looks better than what I was testing earlier, so aren't you guys lucky? One thing you'll see in a lot of NES games, they'll use like just one of the dark colors to actually kind of hint that there's a drop shadow on some elements. Adds a nice depth to it. Now I'll probably go more. I feel like, yeah, I'm to make some tough calls here. I think we want this arch to drop down a little bit here, and these ones will be one lower. Just because I wanted some room for that to look kind of like a shadow. Let's add some dark, grimy dungeon bricks. And this is just letting me do that kind of drop shadow a little better. If I want to push that further, I would probably make a diagonal tile, so it looks like it's kind of casting from a diagonal down. And you can see, let's even try it. Maybe it just looks dark in the center, like a door there. Just having fun. Have fun with it. We could even use parts like this. Detail's been kind of nice for me, just part of this ruin up here. Yeah, it's a little, I don't know, play with it. Don't always use exactly the intended use. Try stuff out and move it around. Like, that's interesting to me, and that just kind of adds a little variety. It's not the same on every stamp of it. I don't like this top. In fact, I don't have a good top piece yet. For like a little, that might be a nice platform. All right, yeah, actually, that's okay. What's this one? Maybe we alternate. Oh yeah, that becomes a nice independent piece as well. Cool. So we're about ready to test it, but there's a couple things we want to change. If we toggle on our collision, one of the things I saw in one of Joe, which is one of the creators of Nessmaker, he's kind of the face of the project and company. Nice guy, really responsive, leads that community really well. But one of his videos, I kind of realized that you can just change your collision type here with the collision view, and if you hold 0, I'm not clicking, I'm just holding 0 on the numpad, and we're painting whatever collision type we have selected here. So in this case it's collision type solid, which is indicated by 1. I don't think we would need 2 rows there, but let's kind of just in case. All right, so this should be all playable here. But we want to go into screen view. Because this is dropping down into a new area, if we go to our monsters, I need to reset up my player palette to use the 2 palettes. Yeah, I did it right, but I just never said okay. That's a classic Todd mistake. Let's try it again. Getting some Zelda 2 vibes down in that dungeon. Game does not hold up. Alright. The scrolling, Nessmaker didn't used to have scrolling, now it's nice and smooth. This is the Metroidvania module, which I've kind of been messing with. I like it a lot so far. Alright, so that's looking like something, looking pretty cool. What I'd probably do next is try to figure out some trickery with the torch, using different palette to kind of give a few hot spots in the background, and maybe see if I could use some of my green palette to give little hints of moss or ivy or something. And that's what I would do from there. So closing thoughts here. I think the power of this technique is just a quick visualization and tweaking the lighting like I was showing. And creating a set of kit bash models like I already have here, just a bunch of my test pieces. I would recommend just working from one master file and keep adding to that, because mixing and matching those details is going to make new background little sprite things kind of exponentially quicker. And I would try everything. Don't assume that you chose the right use for something. Try it out with different palettes, mix and match different tiles together, and have fun with it. Lastly, little plug here. This is that game I've been working on for a number of years, Van Dozer. It's kind of like a crazy Trials meets QWOP vehicle romp. So it's on Steam Early Access, $9.99, and check it out. I'd appreciate any support as a fellow dev. But mostly, plug aside, I wanted to give something back to the Nessmaker community, because they've been really helpful on the forums and everything. It's a fun group to be a part of. So if you haven't heard of it, check it out, and have a good night. Todd is signing off. Adios.